Let me read to you a passage from the 14th chapter of St. Luke's Gospel, verses 12 to 14. It's the Gospel for Monday of the 31st week in Ordinary Time. St. Luke writes, "Then Jesus said to his host, 'When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous.'" That's from Luke chapter 14, verse 12 to 14. Our Lord says to invite the poor. What does all this suggest? Well, our Lord had been invited to the home of the leading Pharisee. There are other scenes in the Gospel in which our Lord is shown dining in the home of a Pharisee, which indicates that even though his most benighted and persistent enemies were drawn from that class, he graciously accepted invitations from them also. Our Lord came to save all. He said that he had come as a doctor to heal the sick, that he had been sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, as the good shepherd that seeks out the stray. He mixed with all and sundry, dining with his friends and those who were not his friends, and with those he was striving to reclaim. He dined with Zacchaeus, a leading tax collector in Jericho, and instantly converted him. He dined with other publicans and sinners, just as he dined with friends such as Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. He dined with scribes and Pharisees, including leading Pharisees. In the setting of the 12, he dined countless times with Judas Iscariot, who would betray him. As he said once, John the Baptist came neither eating and drinking, whereas the Son of Man, divine holiness personified, came eating and drinking. He did so to win souls to the kingdom. So there he is in our gospel scene, in the home of the leading Pharisee, and his words of spiritual advice to the Pharisee are given to us by Luke. I like to imagine our Lord speaking calmly, perhaps quietly, and all the while smiling as he spoke. He directs his remarks to his host, but of course the others who are present would be listening and taking in his words. Our Lord is saying to the Pharisee that in showing hospitality and liberality, he ought have a preference for extending it to the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. This teaching may have been a great surprise to our Pharisee and to his confreres. How unused he may have been to the very thought of it. But he had before him not only one who taught this doctrine, but who, notoriously, in his practice exemplified it. It was precisely the scribes and Pharisees who criticized our Lord for associating and dining even with the sinners. Our Lord was known to practice in this as in everything what he preached. But we must not merely contemplate the failure of the Pharisees, as brought to light by the words of our Lord. Let us ask if we ourselves follow our Lord's teaching in this respect. Our Lord's meaning is plain. We ought to have a special desire to help and favor the poor and the unfortunate. Do we have this desire? It ought to be a great desire. Or do we but reluctantly consider the matter? If our Lord were to be dining in our house, perhaps he would find need to direct this same teaching to us, that when you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or sisters or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they might invite you back and you have repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Our Lord is not asking us to do this or its equivalent always, for our Lord himself did not always invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. But in what way are we implementing our Lord's general point of deep concern for and solidarity with the poor and the forgotten? Of course, we must be practical. Nevertheless, is it the case that there is very little in our Christian life of what our Lord is asking for in today's gospel? The danger is that in relation to those aspects of Christian teaching which we find uncomfortable or perplexing, such as actively assisting the poor and the unfortunate, we might in effect shelve the matter. We may never really get down to making this part of our life. What our Lord says at the end of his remarks to the Pharisee may assist us to act. He promises a reward in heaven. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. We will be repaid abundantly in heaven for anything we do to the least. Let us keep our eyes on our heavenly goal while we spend ourselves in a Christ-like service of God and others here below. In the 25th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, our Lord describes the Last Judgment. How we treat the needy will be a most decisive factor in how we are judged. The judge will say to us that whatever you did to the least of these brothers of mine, you did to me. The Christian religion is a religion involving the service and following of Christ, who loves and identifies with the needy. If we neglect them, we neglect the person of Christ. If we love and serve them, we are loving and serving him.